Let's just go ahead.
Why don't you start?
Slides.
Yes.
Hello everyone, my name is Ashish Thusoo. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Qubole. And I'm here to tell you a little bit, I'll tell you a little bit about the company, but mostly focus on how cloud and I'm more of an infrastructure guy. So I'm more of a person who builds the plumbing where the data scientists can do all the cool stuff like these guys talked about. So I'm going to talk about how cloud is changing the way big data infrastructure can be run and the models that it can be run on. What is different between a cloud deployment of a big data infrastructure versus an on-prem deployment of a big data infrastructure, and what are some of the frameworks that you should think of while making that choice. And a lot of this is, this is acquired knowledge through a couple of things. In my background, of course, as part of Qubole, we run very large Hadoop clusters on the cloud for companies like Pinterest, Quora, MediaMath, DataZoo, and so on and so forth. So that has given us a lot of operational experience about what this infrastructure should look like on the cloud and how it can take advantage of the cloud. And at the same time, in the past, I've also built large-scale systems for processing multiple petabytes of data at Facebook, where I did a lot of work in creating their clusters, the analytics clusters, and so on and so forth. I was also one of the creators of Apache Hive, which you might have heard of. If not, it's one of the systems pretty popular in the Hadoop ecosystem. So from both those perspectives, at Facebook, it was running this infrastructure within a data center and within in a bare metal sort of a deployment. And at Qubole, it's running this infrastructure in the cloud. So from both those perspectives, I've gained some knowledge about how what are the differences and what are some of the advantages and disadvantages, and that's what I'm going to share with you. So, all right. So anyway, is the clicker working? Let's see. Oh. Okay. Oh yeah, you got it plugged in. Fantastic. So on the cloud, the big difference between a cloud deployment of this infrastructure, which a company like Qubole does, versus an on-prem deployment of infrastructure is in flexibility. It's in ease of operations, and it is also in mitigation of the risk that you undertake when you're running this infrastructure in an on-prem deployment. So what do I mean by all these things? I'll just go through some of the examples of what a particular infrastructure team needs to do in each of the scenarios of while running Hadoop on-prem versus running Hadoop on the cloud. So first, when you think of a big data project and you're saying, okay, fine, I decided I'm going to use a system like Hadoop. In on-prem environment, the train looks something like this. You first go about procuring the hardware, stacking it up, building these clusters, deploying the racks of servers, deploying the networking which is needed in order to make it efficient, and so on and so forth. And that process itself takes like weeks and months before you actually get to the starting line. Even after that, even once you do this, once you have done all the deployment and stuff like that, the next challenge then becomes, okay, this is a strong piece of infrastructure, this is a strong piece of technology, but in order to make it effective and in order to make it available to a lot more people in the enterprises, I need to integrate it with 5 different systems before I get to a starting point where now I can use this infrastructure for doing data processing, for doing the actual analytics, for doing for deriving insights out of my big data problems, and so on and so forth. So that is what the train looks like in an on-prem deployment. It's like weeks, if not weeks, months of effort just to get to a place where you are now ready to play with your data and figure out the insights from that data. On the cloud, it's very, very different. It's a very on-demand type of an environment. You need 100 nodes, you can get 100 nodes in minutes. You need 1,000 nodes, you can get 1,000 nodes in a minute. You need 10 nodes, you can get 10 nodes. So it's very on demand. The whole way of thinking changes. It's a very bottom-up process where you react to the demand that you are you're having from your infrastructure, as opposed to planning for your infrastructure based on the past demand that's been generated. So that is very one very significant difference. So on the cloud, for example, if you are doing some big data project or Hadoop project and things like that, you can get your clusters right away on demand based on the workloads that you are running, and can get started with these workloads and get started with the more interesting phase, which is, hey, what are the insights that I want to drive from my data, as opposed to being mired in setting up clusters and racking up servers and stuff like that. So it's a very, very agile environment, and it's an environment which allows you. So what does agility give you? It gives you the mechanics and the tools in your hand where you can play with do a lot of different types of experimentations with your data without being boxed in by the type of infrastructure that you're using. So that is what that agility gives you, and that is why it becomes, in that dimension, it becomes a very superior model to use this infrastructure from the cloud. On the cloud, of course, the jigsaw puzzle is all brought together in a single system, in a single integrated platform, where again you don't have to spend the time in taking the system like Hadoop and integrating it with 5 different other systems just to make it effective. So all those problems, just the startup problem is fixed. The startup problem is not there. The startup is so easy that you can actually start deriving insights from your data, as opposed to be in the infrastructure land. The second thing that the cloud does is reduces the risk of using this infrastructure quite substantially. What do I mean by that? Again, this goes back into the picture of how you think about deploying this infrastructure on-prem. There's a lot of planning process. There's a lot of upfront capital expense. There's a lot of back and forth going. Hey, do we need 100 servers, 200 servers? 50 servers, what type of servers do we need, what type of machines, how many cores, how many disks, how many spindles, what should my network architecture look like, and stuff like that. And that changes very fundamentally, and with all this, you have to deploy capital to get those things in place. On the cloud, it's a rental model. You buy your servers, you do your experimentation, you tear them down. So the upfront expense of even of getting this infrastructure, even at the time when you're still trying to figure out your use cases and stuff like that, is very, very low. It works very beautifully. It gives you a lot of flexibility in how you can leverage that in order to get through to your POCs and actually discover the use cases for you as far as big data is concerned. The third thing is flexibility. Now, up till now, what I've talked about is just getting started with big data infrastructure and so on and so forth. Once you're started, once you have deployed Hadoop in production, once you are doing your analytics and stuff like that, the cloud environment gives you additional flexibility in choosing simple things like, for example, scaling your compute and storage very separately, so that you're just not adding machines and CPUs just to make sure that your storage capacity increases. Choosing different types of machines. You have wide variety of machines. I think AWS has the Amazon cloud has 20 odd machines, maybe even more. Different types of machines with different configurations. Choosing different types of machines for different workloads. All this is possible because of the dynamicity in the cloud, because of the fact that you have access to all those types of machines, and you lose those benefits if you are just doing an on-prem deployment where you have a fixed set of boxes which have been maybe certified by your procurement department and stuff like that, and that's where you sort of work in. On the cloud, the flexibility itself makes things much better, gives you the choice of what type of machines to use for various different types of workloads. Should I store my data in S3 or should I use Glacier as a storage, which is a much more offline storage and things like that. All that is seamlessly built into a cloud platform. The third thing that comes the third thing that I wanted to stress about is, even when you're operating this infrastructure, the way you do operations, the way the things that you think about for an on-prem deployment versus a cloud deployment are very different. Some very simple examples are things like high availability of servers. So in an on-prem deployment, you have fixed number of servers. So of course, yeah, and you might have single points of failure. So you want to make sure that that single point of failure has like backups and stuff like that, so that you don't, if that thing fails, if that particular part of the infrastructure fails, your infrastructure doesn't come down. On the cloud, guess what? You can bring up servers on demand. So if this thing fails, you can bring up another server, and as long as you have figured out a mechanism through which your state is transferable, you're up and running. So the way you think about high availability, for example, and this is just an example of how operations are different. The way you think about those concepts in a cloud environment also differs as opposed to an on-prem deployment. In fact, I think it simplifies to a great degree the mechanics of how you attain some of those things, some of those objectives in a cloud environment as opposed to an on-prem environment. Similarly, having run big clusters at Facebook, I remember conversations with the procurement team where it was like a big capacity planning exercise, trying to predict the future. And yes, I know predictive analytics works to predict the future really well, but we couldn't do that. And at every point, we were lagging behind the demand for infrastructure. So the demand for the infrastructure would outstrip anything that we could put into those clusters and so on and so forth. We of course improved over a period of time, but the mechanics of that is also something that you see in an on-prem deployment. In a cloud deployment, there is almost infinite, I won't say infinite scalability, but there's a lot of scalability there, there's a lot of elasticity there, and the focus then shifts primarily towards, okay, what is important and what is not, as opposed to, hey, how fast can I add machines, what should my procurement pipeline look like, what should my testing, acceptance testing criteria be, and so on and so forth. So it really changes the dynamics of how you operate this infrastructure again in the cloud as opposed to an on-prem deployment. So what does remain the same? The things that still remain the same is what you need to do with your data. How do you want to manage your data? What are the analytics that you want to run on that data? How do you want to model that data? How do you want to model your problems? So a lot of science still remains the same. How do you want to model the problem domain that you're trying to solve into a data problem? How do you want to translate those problems into a data problem? And how, what are the jobs and the transformations that you write? Those things still remain the same. What does change is the underlying infrastructure, and by using the cloud to your advantage, you can make the underlying infrastructure that much more adaptable to the needs of your transformations, of what you're trying to do, as opposed to being boxed by, this is the infrastructure and this is what you can do, and go figure out how you want to, what hacks you want to write to in order to get your problem to fit the infrastructure. On the cloud, it is the other way around, how the infrastructure can fit your problem. And that is actually the real paradigm shift when it comes to using these technologies from the cloud and in a cloud-hosted manner, as opposed to running on-prem deployments of these technologies. Okay. So I'll just take a few more minutes to 2 minutes. Yeah, I'm almost done. This is the last slide. So when you're hopefully I've made a case of why cloud is being transformative from the big data perspective. I think it's generally being transformative from just how the compute paradigm of the should be, and how the infrastructure should be run, and so on and so forth. But the other part is when you are so this is something that we have learned at Qubole. Essentially, when you are going out, suppose you buy into this philosophy that, okay, I should run this in the cloud and stuff like that. The next step is, what type of service, what are the things should I be looking at in order to, figure out whether, the service is useful or not to the cloud. Should I just take Hadoop and run it myself on the cloud, or should I, do something else? The key thing there to focus on is do not, whatever you choose to do not, choose a mechanism which reduces the, which sort of covers up the strong points of the cloud, which is dynamic provisioning, servers on demand. Lot of people, take Hadoop and say, okay, we are going to run Hadoop in the cloud, and what do? They just run long-running Hadoop clusters, which completely defeat the purpose of, how you can leverage the cloud to be dynamically adaptable to your workloads and things like that. So make sure that, the points around the cloud, which is highly scalable object stores, so that your storage and compute can scale separately, and the adaptability in terms of provisioning and dynamically provisioning and deprovisioning resources are not lost when you are making some of those choices. With that, I'll just end and open it up to questions.
Great, thank you. Actually, I have a question. We were starting to talk about this a little bit before the presentation. What's your sense of the sort of overall state of readiness of the market? So especially on the sort of large sort of Fortune 500 type companies, because some of your predecessors here who build sort of Hadoop on-prem solutions, if you ask them, they say, oh, not in a million years, are those guys going to actually go to the cloud? Which I personally don't necessarily agree with, but I'd be curious about your.
So I think Hadoop in the cloud is certainly early, but I think it's getting the cloud itself is getting a lot of adoption in the enterprises. So that is very encouraging. I think a lot more enterprises are now recognizing the agility and the flexibility that the cloud provides, as opposed to just running their own data centers and stuff like that. So what is certainly happening is that a lot of new applications are, being done on the cloud. Similarly, we definitely see people who are at a crossroads saying that, okay, with respect to Hadoop, for example, saying, okay, I have made a commitment to Hadoop, I want to do Hadoop, can I look at cloud solutions as well? Of course, the cloud was not there and nowhere near, as mature as it is now for the last 10, 15 years, right? It was, it's a very recent phenomenon. It's really in 2005 or 6, which it really took off. It really started actually, it took off just very recently. So of course, there's a bulk of applications and data which is, not on the cloud and things like that. But when we see new people using Hadoop and stuff like that, there's a lot of interest in doing it in the cloud and just leapfrogging that entire evolution. It's like in a lot of developing countries, for example, people went to cell phones directly before landlines. So I think the same thing is happening with respect to the cloud, where if you are starting a new thing, a new project and things like that, just do it on the cloud. Just makes a lot more sense.
Question over there.
I take it
so it gets recorded and heard.
My name is Joe Galar. Oh, it's loud. My name is Joe Galar, and I'm with Mezabit, or a data control company here in New York. You mentioned this thing about in the third world countries around mobile first, and now it's cloud first. I know when we've been talking to some folks in prior sessions here, people have mentioned about the inflection point where you go from cloud to premises from the standpoint of total cost and whatnot. Yep. And I know clearly you're selling these sorts of things, so maybe you're very rosy about this. But where do you think, if people are going into the cloud, where it makes sense to actually come back out of a cloud at a certain size of scale?
So that's an excellent question, and there is definitely there is an inflection point where people think that the total cost of ownership, once you're so suppose you're a Facebook scale, right? Of course, it doesn't make any sense to do it on the cloud. They can run their data centers in a much more efficient manner at lower cost and so on and so forth. However, that inflection point over the last years has been actually moving further and further out. So just recently, for example, last week or 2 weeks back, the storage costs in the cloud, for example, S3 and so on and so forth, were cut to 1/3, like a 70% drop. Same for compute, 60% drop. So what is happening is, and this is basically economies of scale, number one, playing there, because you're running larger and larger data centers, and with that the economies of scale come up, and so you can offer compute and storage at lower prices. The second thing is there's a lot more competition also creeping up in the cloud world. So Amazon was the dominant player, and now Azure, Google, and all these things are cropping up. So the trend is towards taking those prices further and further down, so that it becomes really, and because of that, that inflection point is actually getting pushed further and further out. So if you ask me, if that inflection point was, I don't know, X, X size of my deployment a couple of years back, I think now it is at 5X size of that deployment now. And so the trend is really taking it in that direction. So to me, I think it's a matter of time where, and it's pure economies of scale which plays in. If you're running your own data centers, if you are reaching those economies of scale, like these big cloud vendors and so on and so forth, yes, you can run them as efficiently as them, or at lower costs and so on and so forth. But if you are not, you will not be able to match those economies of scale. That's what I think. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. I want to give you time for one more question because you're actually going to fly out. So Ashish actually flew in this morning, is flying out tonight, which I think is awesome, and we're very honored to.
I really wanted to be here.
To have you here. Dan.
Hi, my name is David Kim. I'm a founder of a social enterprise analytics company that uses communications data like email to make predictions about sales pipelines, like CRMs. So I guess my question would be similar to his, except on the other side. So when you're a smaller startup beginning, at what point does it make sense to use a service sort of like yours as opposed to trying to do Hadoop on the cloud ourselves?
I think for a smaller startup, okay, I have a biased view on this, but I'll share my view. It doesn't make sense to do it yourself. I'll tell you why. So one is, so if the core competency of your startup is building, XYZ things, then you really have to ask, is the core competency running Hadoop on the cloud? If it is not, then why focus your energies? You are anyway very short-staffed, very resource-constrained. Startup is a classic resource-constrained environment, right? Why focus those precious resources on the problem, that has already been solved, as opposed to taking those resources and putting it at a place which will get much more bang for the buck for you. So number one. Number two, Hadoop itself was created in a world, in a more on-prem world, where for simple things, Hadoop assumes Hadoop. A lot of promise around Hadoop was the compute and storage are together, so things are faster and so on and so forth. The cloud environment is also very fundamentally different. I didn't touch upon these points, but if you just take a normal Hadoop distro and try to run it in the cloud, the chances are at 10 nodes it will work fine. As you start growing and as you start growing and growing further, things will start breaking because compute and storage are separate on the cloud. The object stores that are on the cloud, S3 in certain regions has eventual consistency guarantees as opposed to strong consistency guarantees. So there are certain technical aspects also. So barring those technical aspects, more from your perspective, you want to, as a small startup, you want to put your precious resources on the problem that will have the biggest bang for buck for you. And the question to ask yourself then is that running Hadoop on the cloud? And if the answer is no, you should not be running it. If the answer is yes, then absolutely go for it, right?
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.